Lep pozdrav, danes je z nami ameriški publicist, avtor, rasni realist, ustanovitelj tako imenovane ameriške renesanse, Jared Taylor. Hello, Mr. Taylor, and good to be here with you today.
Well, it's a great pleasure to be in Slovenia, and I'm honored that you've invited me for this interview. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So let's start with the basics.
Yes.
You're known as someone who advocates for race realism.
Yes.
So maybe you can tell us a bit about this concept of race realism and also why race, far from being just a social construct, actually matters and how it reflects within societies.
Certainly. You mentioned this idea that race is a social construct. To me, this is an idea that is so spectacularly stupid and wrong that only very intelligent people could possibly persuade themselves that it's true. The idea that race is not biological. For heaven's sake, someone who is 6 months old and can't even speak knows the difference between an Eskimo and a pygmy. They understand that perfectly. They understand race. And to somehow pretend that this is something that's been cooked up, some kind of sociological optical illusion, is utterly crazy. It is clearly a biological phenomenon. Now, the other aspect of race realism is to recognize that people of different races consistently build different kinds of societies, wherever you find them in the world. Africans in Africa, or Africans in Great Britain, or in the United States, they build societies that reflect their nature which is not just cultural, but also biological. The same, of course, is with East Asians. East Asians they're a distinctive people, and they also build distinctive societies, and the same, of course, for our people, European people. And to pretend that races are essentially interchangeable, this to me is something that is, first of all, obviously wrong, but it can also have a very devious motive. What it can be used for is to explain to Europeans, when they receive immigrants from all around the world, that they should not be worried, that if the population is changing, if they're being replaced by themselves, because race is just an optical illusion. So, first of all, yes, that is one of the very important aspects of my work, is trying to explain the biological nature, the unchanging nature in many respects of race, and to explain that races are not interchangeable. Absolutely not. They're different and they build different kinds of societies.
Okay, so you've written a book called White Identity, one of your many works. So let's talk a bit about this concept of white identity. We know that we have obviously the national identities, local identities, but one could argue that they are in fact just smaller parts of one bigger civilizational and racial identity.
Yes.
But nevertheless, especially in Europe, people are still mostly focused on their national identities. Sometimes maybe even we could say that they don't see the big picture. So maybe you can tell us a bit about this. Why is white identity, racial identity important? And why is also the cooperation between similar nations important, especially in the world today, if we consider the obstacles that we are facing?
The other aspect of my work is something I call white advocacy. Now, from an American perspective, every other racial group has organizations, publications, lobbying groups that advance their interests, the interests of Blacks, Hispanics, or Asians. Only whites are not allowed to have groups that express their interests. And this is an ultimately, possibly suicidal thing, because the other racial groups in the United States, they do not hesitate to do what is in their interest. In the United States Congress, there is a Black caucus, there's a Hispanic caucus, an Asian caucus. They have only one purpose, and that is to look at every possible piece of legislation and say, is it good for our people? White people never are allowed to look at things that way. Now, so in the United States, white people have a clear interest in not becoming a minority. In 1960, 1965, that area, the United States was about 90% white. And then in just 80 years after that, we are predicted to become a minority. The United States will change. It's continuing to change in very, very drastic and to us disagreeable ways as it ceases to be majority white. Now, what is my idea of what this lesson can be for Europeans? You're certainly correct. In Europe, many nationalists have a local, almost a tribal sense of being Slovenians or being Hungarians or Slovaks. This is entirely understandable. And in the United States, when our country was first developed, we had Europeans that came from many, many parts of Europe. They, in fact, became a kind of European melting pot. The European white population is composed of many European identities. And when people talk about immigration now from Africa or from the Middle East, they say, well, they'll be just like the Italians or just like the Poles. No, a very silly idea. And as I point out, there have been two groups in the United States that have been there long before the Poles or the Italians. That's blacks and American Indians. They've not assimilated the way Europeans have. European people, we have sometimes different religions, we have different languages, but ultimately we are part of a brotherhood. A world, I like to talk about the world brotherhood of Europeans, including Europeans like me. I claim to be a European just as much as all of you. And so, in 2014, for example, I was in Hungary, and I was very surprised to hear Hungarian nationalists asking or talking about, well, who do we hate more, Romanians or Slovaks? Well, okay, I understand the Treaty of Trianon. I understand what happened to Hungary. And I understand here in Slovenia as well. Other nations think that they were partly amputated so that Slovenia could be Slovenia. I understand these problems, but these are ancient, well, some of them not so ancient, but these are old problems that we as white people have to overcome. Because ultimately, the identity that will matter to us in the decades to come is that we are Europeans, largely Christian Europeans. And I believe that if we take this large view and protect our heritage against people who are not European, not Christian, if we can protect this heritage, then we can build a future that is just as glorious as the past that we have enjoyed as Europeans. So that is my idea of white identity. It is this element that unites all European white people, and we must emphasize that. Now, of course, we don't all want to be identical. The French talk about l'Europe des nations, Europe of the nations, and we have wonderful differences. Germans are different from Frenchmen. And even within France, we have Breton, we have Gascon, we have Alsatians. All of these differences are marvelous and wonderful, and we can be proud of these things. But we as Europeans must stop fighting each other. We've spent centuries slaughtering each other, and this must stop because we have far greater challenges. And the challenge comes from all of those people all around the world who live in failed societies that are going to continue to fail. And because they are failed societies, they will want to live among us because we have built the most desirable, successful societies in the world, but we have built them for our children, not for them.
Well, you spoke about, I completely agree with you, of course, but you just spoke about that people, even in Europe, the white people, white nations have to realize that they are one brotherhood facing common obstacles.
Yes.
So do you believe that maybe this globalization and mass migration from the third world, maybe this will be one of the, let's say, positive aspects of it, that Europeans will realize that they have much more in common with each other and that maybe they will unite, sort of, to unite the front against this? Do you think this is a possibility in the future?
Well, if it requires a certain amount of non-European immigration for Europeans to realize they have a common identity, then I suppose we should consider that this is perhaps a good thing. But the Europeans better figure that out.
No, of course.
If you look at Britain, for example, in Britain, the possibility of maintaining a white majority gets slimmer and slimmer all the time. Britain is probably on its way more rapidly than any European country to being having a white minority. They are giving up their destiny they're putting it in the power of people who are not like them, who can never be like them, who never want them to be, will never want to be them. So this is a very dangerous game. I'm hoping that Europeans, as for example, Slovenians, you do not yet have a big immigration problem, but you just look a few hundred miles away and you see what's happening in France or Germany. And it seems to me that any European country that has not yet had mass immigration must recognize immediately what the threats are, that this must be resisted at all costs, that everything that is beautiful about your country depends on its remaining in your hands, not anyone else's hands.
Well, talking about the negative consequences of multiracial societies, there are increasing number of people, maybe political analytics, commentators, and so on, both in USA and in places like France, for instance, who are trying to warn the public or claiming that, in fact, this situation could lead to a sort of a civil conflict between these different groups, which all have their own racial interests. So, how do you view this? Do you view this? Do you think that it is possible that some civil war will happen in America, and what should we do now to prevent such an outcome?
In the United States, there will never be a civil war of the kind we had before, where we had two separate governments. This is the American Civil War of 1861 to 1865. There will never be another war like that. And if there is large-scale violence, it will be various bands and groups. It will not be a government against a government. I don't think that will necessarily happen. Of course, if the choice is war, violence, or complete obliteration, well, then, of course, we must fight. Survival is the first law. I hope that at least in the United States, more and more people will recognize that multiracialism always ends in conflict and tension. This is disagreeable for everyone. It's disagreeable for white people, for blacks, Hispanics. No one likes this. And it's my hope that bit by bit we can move towards a recognition that it's perfectly natural, normal, and healthy for Americans of all races to live in a racially coherent society. Most white people, whether they admit it or not, they want to live with white people. If you ask a white liberal, tell me a majority non-white neighborhood that you would like to live in, they have no idea. Or list to me a majority non-white school you would like to send your children to. No. In their own lives, liberals live in their private lives just like racially conscious white people. We have a saying from one of, I believe, the great geniuses of right-wing thinking in the United States, Joseph Sobran, probably not very well known to you. He used to say that in their mating and migratory habits, liberals are indistinguishable from members of the Ku Klux Klan. So he also used to say, another brilliant thing, is that the purpose of a college education in the United States is to give people the correct attitudes towards non-whites, but the means and the professional qualifications to make enough money to live as far away from them as possible. So there is an enormous amount of hypocrisy in the United States. White people who claim to love diversity, but have no diversity in their own lives. I believe that it will be possible in the coming decades to convince more and more Americans that the government should get out of the business of trying to bring people, push them together, and let them separate, to recognize that this is natural, normal, and healthy. And in this way, I think it is not impossible that the United States can develop different racially coherent areas. That is my dream for the United States. Now, as for Europe, I think that countries like Slovenia, those on the other side of what we used to call the Iron Curtain, they have not yet been victims of mass immigration. You must learn from the mistakes of your neighbors to the West. You must learn from the mistakes of Americans and Canadians and preserve your own nations. I'm very optimistic that you'll be able to do that.
Okay, so staying in the USA for a bit longer,
Yes.
how would you assess the Trump's presidency so far, especially in the light of his new support towards white South Africans? And he was even mentioning, he didn't mention explicitly white genocide, but he was mentioning that there's happening a genocide in South Africa and so on. So how do you view all this?
Donald Trump has benefited tremendously from the fact that he lost to Joe Biden the first time. He spent 4 years out of the White House. And during that 4 years, he has clearly thought very carefully about what he should have done during the previous term when he was elected in 2016. I cannot tell you how impressed I am by the measures that he has taken in terms of trying to rescue the United States from this systematic anti-white insanity that has been pushed into every corner of our lives. I do not believe that Donald Trump is a racially conscious white man. I wish he were. I think that he seems to have the idea that really anyone can be basically an American, maybe Muslims, not so good, maybe Somalians, not so good, but maybe a few of them can be Americans. He doesn't think in terms of the demographic future of the United States. He doesn't realize that you can't make America great again unless you make America white again. I think if you told him that, he would get angry. But I don't know. I've never met him. I've never met him. He's not a stupid man, and he must realize that race makes some sort of difference. Now, this said, all of the measures that he has taken as president, the executive orders that he has signed, are precisely the executive orders that a racially conscious white man would sign in order to get rid of all of the terrible anti-white policies and practices that have been put into place by his predecessors. Now, I have followed all of the crazy things that the United States government and private companies have been doing, but even I have been unaware of some of the ways in which this is enforced. Now, one that is an obvious one is, as you probably know, in the United States, any child born in the United States, even if his parents are illegal immigrants, gets automatic American citizenship. Well, the first day in office, he wrote an executive order that is going to end this practice. Now, it will go to the Supreme Court probably. That was an obvious thing to do. But he has also eliminated all kinds of little details about how American law is carried out. There's something called the Office of Contract Compliance. Most Americans have never heard of this part of the government. What it does is make sure that every company that has a contract with the United States government is making sure that the business goes to a certain number of blacks, a certain number of Hispanics, and this always inevitably is at the disadvantage of whites, sometimes at the disadvantage of Asians. But he, by executive order, he has stopped all of this. These are perhaps details that are a little bit boring to a European audience. But for example, previous administrations have launched a kind of legal procedure against police departments in American cities because they're always arresting and imprisoning more blacks and Hispanics than whites. Oh, this must be racism. Well, this isn't racism. This reacts to the fact that we have wildly different crime rates, but this means the police are always interacting with blacks. Blacks are resisting arrest. We get into conflict. Sometimes a black man dies. And so the liberal views that all of this is racism. And so they are forced to come under the control of the United States Federal Justice Department to make sure they're not being racist. All of this, Donald Trump has said, no, we're not going to do any of this anymore. Not going to do any of this anymore. This is a huge step forward. And it seems to me someone in his administration understands race, even if he doesn't. Even if he doesn't. I'll give you another example. In the United States, we celebrate birthdays of only two individuals as national holidays. One is Jesus Christ, and the other is Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King, the great black man who saved America from itself. Well, his celebration is practically, it's almost a national religion practically. But he ordered that the United States government, no part of the government, is to celebrate Martin Luther King Day in any way. I'm not sure if I had been elected president, I would have dared to do that. But what he is doing is exactly right down to the details what someone who perfectly understands race would do. Now, likewise, in terms of immigration, the number of immigrants crossing the border illegally is practically zero now. Whereas in the previous administration, 1 million a year, 2 million a year, Joe Biden and his Vice President Kamala Harris, come on in, apply for asylum. No, zero. And he's been very good about trying to get the illegal immigrants out of the country. So in that respect, Donald Trump has impressed, deeply impressed, even me, by the measures that he has taken that will, in effect, preserve a white majority, at least to some degree, through immigration, and also to get rid of these systematic procedures that have been essentially and fundamentally anti-white. In that respect, I think President Trump's presidency so far has been a huge success. You had mentioned the idea of welcoming South African farmers, Afrikaners, as refugees. This is especially noteworthy because he set the refugee quota to 0. Joe Biden had a refugee quota of 150,000. He set it to 0. Not only did he set it to 0, there were 60,000 refugees that had been officially admitted to the United States, but were not yet in the United States. They were in other countries preparing to come. He says, no, you guys too. Too bad, too late. The previous administration said yes. Our administration says no. And the only people that he has welcomed as refugees are white South Africans. Now, this is a remarkable thing, a truly, truly remarkable thing. So I sometimes get into debates with American comrades who say the electoral process is futile, nothing can be changed but the ballot box. Obviously, this is one of the prime examples of something extremely important that can be changed by voting. So politics still matters. So that's a long answer to your question.
Thank you very much. This was very interesting. So maybe for the end, you can tell us how do you like Slovenia, and do you have any final messages for Slovenian viewers, identitarians, and so on?
Well, I've been mostly in Ljubljana, which is a charming city. I think it's beautiful. And all the Slovenians that I've met have been very friendly, just ordinary people as well as comrades like you. But the message that I have is essentially what I said before, that our survival as a people, our survival, not just as Slovenians, not just as Germans or Frenchmen or Croatians, our survival as the heirs to Western civilization, this depends on our survival as a people, as a biological people. Only the biological descendants of the people who created Slovenian language, Slovenian art, Slovenian sensibility, only the biological descendants of those people can preserve the essence of being Slovenian into the future. And this is a precious, precious thing that you must cherish and pass on to your children and their children forever.
Thank you very much.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. So that's it.